So Seneca County has a new county manager, interim county manager. Mitch Rowe was named interim county manager for Seneca County a couple weeks ago. September 4th was John Shepard's final day serving in that capacity. He was the county manager since 2014, and Rowe has been brought in basically as a stopgap.
Right, he's being brought back.
Right, so he was the county manager before Shepard from late 2011 until 2014. He will serve in that capacity for maybe a year, maybe 2 years. The board will seek out a deputy county manager who will be trained and learn from Rowe and then eventually succeed Rowe in the non-interim capacity. Interesting process. Instead of going straight to search committee for the county manager, right. Hiring this person because the board voted to give Chairman Bob Shipley authority to negotiate and hire Rowe straight up with no true voting process.
Okay.
Neither here nor there now that the deed's been done and we're here. But at the same time, I think raises some questions about how these processes should play out. And I also think that this really puts Seneca County in an interesting spot. So last week, my column in the Finger Lakes Times, I looked at what Seneca County's best option would be given the last several, you can go back basically 2.5 years, to see the repeated micromanagement of the Board of Supervisors, putting the county manager, whoever that would have been, whether that was a John Shepard, a Mitch Rowe, or anybody else, it would have been very difficult for them to operate and do their job effectively. That said, Seneca County has a lot of issues that they have to start to address. So I thought it was interesting because, and I know it would be a very complicated process, but a county executive system seems to be more fitting for a county like Seneca that has that type of personality conflict on the Board of Supervisors that tends to entrench things rather than allow progress to happen and allow actual change to happen after they say, we want to do this.
Right.
But, it's one of those things. I'll be very interested to see what the first 6 months of Mr. Rowe's tenure look like as far as this interim county managership. Just see what this looks like, because there are going to be there's a lot of staffing issues. There's a lot of communication issues that have to be resolved. And then there's a lot of issues around the finance department and, all of these things together. I'm not saying one person can't handle it, but I think the Board of Supervisors, if they want Rowe to do it and do it right, they're going to have to a little bit get out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would go even one step further, although this will never happen. So I guess I'm discussing it as kind of a fool's errand. But I feel like for a long time, I have thought that the way Ontario and Seneca County run their boards of supervisors is not correct. If we look at some other counties that have like a legislature where you're actually looking at voting districts as opposed to just the territories, just following. So if we could get to a point, so I think about like Seneca County. Some of the towns in Seneca County encompass so much geography and such a diverse kind of range of issues that it seems like it would be helpful to move to more of a legislature model where people are representing regions of the county and then interacting with the town board for the towns within those regions. But I think people might be... I think the current system allows things to be too divisive and allows things to be too territorial in a way that doesn't serve the public interest. So I don't necessarily think, and I'm just pulling the town names at random. This isn't anything in particular, but I'm not sure that Varick and Romulus have a fundamental difference in governance strategy. In terms of county affairs. Yet, with a separate supervisor, then there is more potential for the different towns to maybe want to dive into issues that they aren't as directly affected by and may not have as much expertise in. Now, again, I just picked those two towns at random. That is not at all a question about those supervisors, and if you even asked me who they were off the top of my head, I'm not sure I could tell you, so it was nothing personal. I think, like, speaking about Ontario County, I feel like moving to a legislature would be far more effective. We'd have much better governance than we do right now under a county board of supervisors, because we've seen with development issues, nobody has been able to look at the big picture about how Ontario County functions in terms of economic development and housing. Instead, it's become very territorial, and so you've got, hopefully, Geneva and Canandaigua may be able to work together to bring some more sensible strategies, but it's getting missed. So all of that was to say that I agree with you that a county executive kind of model works better, especially if you were going to more of a legislature than a board of supervisors. So there's a lot of, I mean, if Seneca County's in this current state of affairs, there's a lot of stuff they could look at, especially if they're going to ease into hiring the long-term person.
Yeah, and I think you have to do both together. Because one of the interesting things that we've seen in the headlines just over the past couple months is the challenges that Cayuga County, which has a legislature, has had between the I don't want to call it a worn relationship, but a challenged relationship, especially from this with this element of micromanagement involved between the legislature and the administrator. It begs the question. It's like, why are we all here? What are we all trying to do? Identify what the big objectives are. But as a legislature or as a governing body at that level, I've always had the mindset that it seems the best process is just to have the idea, create a vague concept of what you want to do, and then allow the manager, administrator, if that's the way you're going to go, allow them to actually follow through and execute. Don't change your mind after you've made a decision and that administrator or manager has already begun the process of doing it, or because you were in the minority on a vote, push everything you have toward, turning that upside down, because I think what that does is it just creates more of a challenge in terms of trying to govern and get things done, because it's hard enough as it is to get things done, especially when you're talking about unions and you're talking about, all these different things that make, everything is multiple decision cycles. It's pretty rare you find stuff that jumps in one.
That's the difficulty you get into in general when you have part-time legislators, part-time elected officials, because what ends up happening is sometimes there aren't a lot of unique ideas generated. So the directions given to the staff are not just vague, but maybe non-existent. And then it isn't until they're presented with a final plan that they can actually give their attention to it and say, wait a second, I didn't like this. So I think you're talking about a longer process of more engaged governance, which I totally agree is desperately needed. Whatever format we need to put in place to get that to happen, that would be great. But that might be a separate, more long-term issue. I don't know, because I think, even city council in Geneva, I mean, I don't envy Sage as the city manager, because looking at how city council functions, I mean, basically, you could leave one of those meetings and not know exactly what they were expecting her to do for the next meeting, because sometimes even a single counselor will articulate one position and then by the end of the discussion have the entirely opposite view. And you've got to be, got to have a decoder ring or something to be able to figure it out. So that's, Yeah,
So
these are tough things. These are tough things when you've got elected officials and then paid staff who have training in actual execution of policy. You actually need someone to do the policy.
right, and I think that's pretty much where this whole debate centers around. And it's weird because it requires so much work to make any change in terms of, a legislature versus a board,
right.
versus an executive versus a manager.
Yeah.
All of those things require so much political will and work that it's almost, observing these boards from the outside for the same reasons that you just mentioned, having part-time, elected officials. It's clear something like that would almost never happen.
Right.